To the Statement of Work Drafting Insights and Best Practices Symposium for today. This is really a collaborative effort being brought to you not only by TCP, the Sponsored Research Office, and the Business Development Team, but also with a lot of input from prior symposiums and the input you had and the questions that you had that you brought to the table, and working with our contracts administration team as well to make sure that we can touch everything that you need. Just make sure that you're aware we are filming for today, and so that way we can use this for future training. So there'll be some Q&As and things like that at the end of each session as each of us speak, but then just make sure that you wait for a mic so that we get a good recording for it, so everybody can take benefit and have the benefit of your input and questions. And as well as resources will be available at the end of this session, so we'll provide them on our website. If you want them via email or whatever, we can make sure that you get those. So just know that this isn't quite the end of it. Statement of Works never really end. So we'll just go ahead and kick it off and get started. So there's 3 speakers today, so I'll just kind of kick it off here, and then I'll introduce Ushma, who's going to talk about some of that pre-engagement and some of that homework that you do at the very beginning of developing that statement of work. And then Pete's going to go through some really good mechanics and some things that are very important contractually, as that statement of work really is part of that contract. It becomes Appendix A to those terms and conditions, so it's very important there. And then we'll go over some kind of tips and tricks and some lessons learned based on the hundreds of proposals that we see every year and the statements of work. But before I kick that off too much, there's always changes in TCP, and we're really excited to have 2 new recruits that have come to us from different areas. And so I'd like to introduce Priscilla Antunes. She joins us from IBM's Watson Research Center, where she focused on materials research and applications to photovoltaic devices. As you know, and you'll learn, statements of work have to actually, I have to actually read them, so when you get too technical, you need to make sure that I can understand it. She actually received her PhD in inorganic chemistry from the University of Southern California, and a bachelor's degree in industrial and management systems engineering from the Universidad de Sonora in 2001. She's the primary point of contact for PIs in bio, HEP, and DRINC. So that's a relatively new group that's forming, so I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot about that in the near future. And we're also excited to have Aaron Fluitt. He's new to the business development team as well. He's the newest of our family there over in TCP. He joins us from BCG, the management consulting company. Before that, his scientific background is a PhD with Juan de Pablo at IME at UChicago, so he's a local, where he developed computational models and methods for studying the dynamics of proteins and soft materials. He's the primary point of contact for PIs in the IME at Argonne and the MSD. So as you know, there's a lot of BDEs, or a good number of them, that all support all the divisions, but feel free to reach out. They're not really, even though we say they're the primary point of contact for that specific division, they're really kind of the conduit to other folks within the team as well. So if there's someone else on that BDE team that has some expertise in your area, they will just make sure that you make those connections. But at least that way you know at least one person that you can chat with that will get you what you need and the resources that you need. So welcome to Priscilla and Aaron, who are sitting right over there. So you can wave and say hi. So here at Argonne, our actual mission, everything that we do in the sponsored research area goes back to what is our mission and why are we here, how are we connected to the DOE and the University of Chicago. Argonne's mission is really to be cutting edge research to do cutting-edge research in the multidisciplinary areas that Argonne brings to bear on problems. So we want to elicit the best and the brightest. And so today what we want to do is give you some tools in order to be able to accomplish that. And sponsored research is actually one of the key areas that we can actually make some of those impacts, and where those impacts are really visible, not just to us, but anytime you're engaging outside sponsors with DOE, you're obviously bringing things to bear that people want and problems that they need help to solve. So that impact is kind of makes it cycle through and creates importance. That impact also helps to solicit more work and foster new thoughts and ideas and problem-solving things that really are unique to the National Laboratory that they can bring to bear on some of the problems that face our world today, not only with non-Fed and industry sponsors, but also with some of our Fed partners as well. So we do quite a bit of both. So the impact and the importance of sponsored research is key, and every single one requires a statement of work. So what we're here for is to recognize that within that statement of work, there's always potential failure points, and we want to make sure that we mitigate those failures as much as possible by making sure that you're engaging in the right way and working with that sponsor, asking them the right questions from the very beginning, not just to get it through Pearl faster, which of course for my team, we like best when it's a good clean statement of work to get it through that process quicker. So it's one thing to look at the metrics in terms of how long it took, but if we get that good statement of work at the beginning, it not only helps get it through that approval process, but it makes sure that everybody within the institution that's a stakeholder understands what's going to go on. Again, it's a contractual arrangement, so what the sponsor and you are very clear on what your tasks, milestones, and deliverables are. So throughout the life of that project, if you have a good statement of work at the very beginning, you can mitigate a lot of errors and pain points along the way, so that when you go to close out, you've delivered what you had hoped to deliver, and you're able to continue work and hopefully foster not only that sponsor, but additional work as we move ahead. So that kind of sets the stage a little bit about why we're here. So I'm going to turn it over to Ushma, and she's going to talk about getting those engagements done up front in the best manner.
So I'm Ushma Kriplani. I work in TCP. I'm going to talk about the process of new business development. How do we get new business to the lab from non-DOE sponsors, where DOE is our primary sponsor? So these are some tips and techniques that we have developed in TCP that work well for us. And in the context of new business development, the SOW is a very powerful tool, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So at Argonne, we do many things really well. And yet, we sometimes forget how important the skill set is that each of you who's a domain expert brings, especially when it's embedded in the context of a whole bunch of other really strong scientific and technical skills, and in the context of a DOE national lab, which brings its own imprimatur and its own credibility. So I think it's important for us all to remember that even though we're used to thinking of ourselves as doing science or engineering in a specific context, that context is really much bigger than it might appear in your day-to-day work, and quite valuable and unusual to the outside world. So I think we know in TCP that about 90% of all the new business that comes to the lab comes when the PIs go out to a conference or an industry visit or some networking event, and you meet one of your counterparts from industry or non-DOE, and there's some interest in the work you both do. You both want to collaborate further. So at that point, a conversation starts, and I would like to tell you some techniques that we find really help move this to a place that's good for you and can do it in an efficient fashion. So as you start talking with your technical counterpart, you want to start asking them questions. You almost always know at some basic level how your technology or your scientific skill, modeling, whatever it is, addresses their immediate problem. But it's important to understand, how does this problem fit into their larger context? Is it a one and done? Do they want you to do some test and then you never need to hear from them again, or them from you? Or is it something that is one part of an extensive product development cycle, and that you can help them not just now, but multiple times down the chain, and you can bring in other lab capabilities to help address a problem in a much wider way? What this does, as you have this conversation and try to figure out these things, what this does is, not only does it help bring more business to the lab, though perhaps not just necessarily to your group, but much more importantly, it conveys to the sponsor that you have a deep and wide understanding of their issues, and that you're really motivated to help them solve those issues. And that starts a process of trust and confidence in you and Argonne that is invaluable for a longer-term relationship. So as you learn about what it is that you can do for them, you also get an understanding of how much this is worth to them in actual dollar values. How does this impact their business? What are the downstream effects? What are some of the upstream effects that can be mitigated if you solve this problem for them? So this kind of broad conversation is a very useful thing to have, and it can be had in a fairly early stage. I always say, put yourself in their shoes. If you had a problem to solve that was somewhat complex, you really want someone to come with you with some domain knowledge that points you in the right direction for a variety of things, and not just says, okay, well, I'm going to paint your wall, and then I don't really care if the paint matches on the other side of this piece that I'm going to paint for you. So giving of your knowledge freely is a very good way to build relationships and to build trust in a community, especially if these people have not worked with national labs before and don't understand how many different things we can do and do well. So that's kind of more of a technology focus. You're thinking about technical problem solving or scientific problem solving for the person you're engaged with. But as the conversation progresses, there are other aspects to it. You learn more about your sponsor. For example, you figure out whether or not they're thinking of this data, this project you might do for them will result in some data, some software, perhaps some materials. Are they thinking of this deliverable as a source of competitive advantage, and so they don't want to talk about it? Is it going to be completely proprietary? Is it something that they would prefer that we don't even mention that we're working with them? We do have cases like that. On the other hand, a lot of companies want to bring their peer group with them. They want to make it well known that they're working with the national labs on something, and that brings the industry segment alongside. We have cases of that as well. So it's good to understand as you go through the conversation where they're coming from, what do they want from it, and then it comes to some specific things. Do they want to publish these results? If it's proprietary, they don't. That's fine. How does your program manager feel about it? Because there's no SPP or CRADA going through the system unless your DOE program manager, your primary funding program manager, agrees that you can publish or not publish. So you know what your program manager wants. Make sure fairly early on that it's also aligned with what your potential sponsor might want. And if not, is there a way to work around it? We can help you with that. So it's not necessarily a death knell to a future relationship, but it's something that needs to be considered. Another thing that I think we frequently leave too late in the process is understanding where the funds are coming from. So a lot of small businesses are leveraging federal funds to do research with us, and sometimes we don't realize that because it's a subcontract through some other federal grant. But I think Bill Walsh, who runs contracts administration for us, said something like 30% of our industry money is actually government flow through. In that case, there are certain requirements for publishing that you don't need to worry about, or maybe you do. So that sort of thing is useful to know. That, by the way, the leveraging of government funds is not just true for small companies. Increasingly larger companies, Bosch, UTC, have entire divisions of their businesses that are set up to leverage government funding to do work with the national labs and with universities. And again, in those cases, there are requirements that flow through the federal funding for publishing and various other things that it's good to be aware of. So it's a source of funds, it's also the timing. If it really is their own money, when is it going to be available? Quite frequently, we find that companies have end-of-the-year slush fund that they want to spend with us. Argonne does that sort of thing too, so we understand how it works. Are we ready then to take advantage near the end of their funding cycle to take this money from them and give them something of value for it? I've listed these as kind of a sequential list, but this is really things that we talk about, and it's an iterative process. You go through this as you like in many ways, and each time you acquire more information. So how do you document that information? How do you keep track of what you've learned and where this conversation is going? Well, that's what you use a statement of work for. So you start early, perhaps as early as the second conversation. You make an outline of an SOW, and you can just do this by email. You can say, it was great meeting you. We talked about this measurement, and in that one paragraph outline, you're saying what it is you talked about and what you can do. So it's not called an SOW, except in your mind, you need to be aware, thoughtful, that this is what you're doing. You're capturing the work that you can do for them that they have shown some interest in. And it needn't be detailed because your conversation doesn't merit that at that point. But as time goes on, you ask more questions along the lines that I've described, and this graphic here describes the Kaizen process of asking questions and why you ask them in specific orders. But the onus really is on us, Argonne, the scientists or the biz dev people, to ask these questions and get this information. Typically, your sponsor is going to be very busy, and it's not that we are not, but in the end, we are the ones who have to figure out exactly what it is they need done and how best we can do it, if we want to do that. An interesting aspect of using the SOW here and documenting each conversation with an increasingly detailed SOW that can be shared by email is that along the way, questions of timing come in. How long will it take you to do this thing that you're outlining? How much money will it cost? And as these questions come up and you figure out answers or approximate answers for them, it really helps you qualify who your serious partners are. These people that you're talking with, are they there just to have a casual conversation and they have absolutely no intention in paying for your time to do this? Or are they actually interested in moving forward and getting some work done? So it saves you a lot of time downstream with not very much work up front as you move through this process iteratively. The other thing is, essentially as part of the discussion, there's exchange of information, and that helps set expectations. So if there is no way you can engage on a piece of work for 6 months because you have deadlines until then, this is going to become obvious. So it might take only 3 months to do, but if you can't start it for another 6 months, that might be a problem for your sponsor. And it's really good to know that. It's good for you to know that their slush fund is going to become available next month, and you need to be ready for it, whether or not you have the time. Sometimes you can't do it that year, but then it's good to know what their process internally is so you can be ready the next time the slush fund comes around, and well before that time you have an outline of an SOW. You might have a detailed SOW to put in place. So the more experienced PIs at this lab who do a lot of work with the outside kind of always have a one-paragraph SOW that's almost, it's canned, and it's ready to send out to almost any conversational partner. But a lot of groups don't do that much work with the outside, and those of you who are just starting to do it will find this that your one-paragraph SOW is a useful thing to have ready, and you can develop it as you have more conversations. So this is an iterative process. You end up at a detailed document that actually lists the tasks and deliverables and milestones that are going to make both you happy and your sponsor happy. I should point out that along this way, quite frequently, you will find out that what they want you to do is not something you have any interest in doing, or you may have interest in doing it, but your program manager absolutely hates the idea, and then it's not a good fit for us. Or it needs to be that the publishing restrictions are different for them than you're willing to handle. So it's totally okay to stop when you realize that this fit isn't right for you. It has to be work that's mutually aligned for them and for us, and makes both them and us add value to our respective careers. So this is an efficient method to get the answer that's right for you, and in many cases it's also right for them, but if it isn't, them's the bread. a small, low-value SPP or trader is frequently the start of a very good relationship. So just to end here, how does the SOW fit into the entire business development process? So stepping back a bit, I think many of you must have seen this graphic or a similar graphic before. It describes more or less a general business development pipeline. And the first step is something that I didn't really touch on, but in general, if you're starting something from scratch, if you're looking at a greenfield analysis of what the lab does, and you say, well, we have these capabilities, which of them are we going to do business development with? That's where I'd start in the first place. I'd stock take and then see what to do with it. What I've really been talking about are the middle three steps, going from the initial conversation with a potential sponsor to trying to qualify these sponsors and get to a much more detailed understanding of what they would like to do, which you're documenting in an SOW as you go. Finally, to a detailed SOW with very specific tasks and deliverables. And at various stages of this, you can get help from sponsored research, legal, people on my team. We're happy to help as required at each of these levels. So, as I said, I've really been talking about the exploration, discovery, and engagement stages. And in some sense, the SOW, the final SOW that this session is about, is the last stage. And here we transition between engagement and contract. We transition from thinking about this as a business development tool to thinking about how the SOW fits into a contract. And for that legal perspective, Pete Slonyak is going to walk you through it. Thank you.